I would like to start off by saying that this experience is 100% real. Whether you believe in these things or not is for you to decide. But I was a skeptic too. Then my life and perspective on what could really be out there changed forever. Being raised in a family of truck drivers, naturally upon graduating high school in 2011, I too became a truck driver right out of high school, just like my dad and uncles. I started out hauling pulpwood logs in Louisiana, but after I turned 21, I got a job driving for a flatbed company out of Tulsa in 2014. I had been driving over the road for about a year. Driving is mostly just boring. You spend 80% of your life in your truck wishing you were home. One night in late August, I was delivering to Salt Lake City from Denver. I took the I-70 west until coming to Highway 191 in Utah at around 2 a.m. I decided to take this way because I had never been down the road before and my truck's GPS indicated it was a safe route to be on. I didn't deliver until 3 p.m., so it wasn't going to be out of my way. I'm driving along this highway listening to music and chatter on the CB when, out of nowhere, the CB begins emitting an intense, high-pitched squealing noise that lasted for about 15 seconds. Thinking it was just interference, which is pretty normal on a CB. A few minutes pass and again the noise blasts. This time louder, but only for a few short seconds. I blew this off as interference as well, but was getting a little annoyed, so I turned my CB down a little, but enough I could still hear faint chatter. What seemed like only 2 to 3 minutes had passed, and out of nowhere, my near-mute radio blasted the same noise, but at a deafening volume. Now I'm becoming concerned because, like I said, I turned it down to near whisper, and it was putting out this strange noise at movie theater levels. The noise lasted for what felt like a full minute, and as soon as it ceased, an array of rhythmic clicking and popping sounds came out of the speaker. This lasted almost 3 minutes, causing me to become distracted trying to figure out what was wrong. When I couldn't get the noise to stop, I tried turning the radio off completely, but to no avail. The noises continued for what must have been another 2 minutes. By this time, I had found a small spot just big enough to pull off the road to disconnect this demonic CB completely in hopes it would help. I got the radio wires disconnected and placed it on my bunk to stow away upon arriving at my delivery spot. As soon as I set it down and turned around to sit back in the driver's seat, I noticed a set of glowing, orangish-red eyes staring menacingly through a bush at my truck. Something in me screamed, "Put the fucking truck in gear and get as far from this thing as possible." But my body wouldn't respond to my brain's commands. I was frozen and becoming increasingly more terrified with each second. The area around me became deathly quiet. I couldn't hear my truck's engine or the music anymore. I was transfixed on this set of eyes which never blinked or looked away from me from the truck. What felt like forever passed, and out of the silence the CB that lay on my bed blew up in the clicks and pops and gurgling noises, scaring me to the point I almost shit myself. I jumped and looked at the radio as soon as my eyes rest on it. It cut off. Turning back around to see if the eyes were still there, what I saw was something I could only describe as a Stephen King topic. This thing stood on 2 legs, with a skeletal-like body wrapped in leathery-looking skin. Its face was contorted with empty, hollow eyes, a small, almost non-existent nose, and a mouth void of lips, exposing its large, sharp-pointed teeth. It stood maybe 20 feet from the front of the truck, staring through the windshield at me. I began to shake, tremble, and the feeling of nausea quickly arose. I felt myself begin to throw up when the CB lets out a brief screech, and then a very intense growl comes through like that of a wolf or bear or some other apex predator. The being began slowly moving toward the truck, and it was this moment I felt like I was in imminent danger. My brain screamed again, "Get the fuck in the driver's seat, put the fucking truck in gear, and get the fuck out of here." This time, my legs responded to the movement. I quickly fell into the seat, slamming my foot down on the clutch and thrusting the shifter into second gear as if I was trying to rip it out of the floor. I stomped on the gas, turning back onto the road, frantically trying to shift gears, but my nerves were so out of whack I missed fifth, causing me to panic more. I drove and I didn't stop until reaching Salt Lake City. I pulled into the Love's truck stop and nervously walked inside, still shaking. I must have been visibly nervous because the cashier asked if everything was okay. I told her no and explained what happened. She said she knew the area I was in was a hotbed for UFO and other sightings. That what I had seen could have been a skinwalker. After that night, I never went back down Highway 191, and if all possible, tried to avoid any loads going towards it. This happened to me in college, when I lived with my roommate, Michelle. It was our freshman year, and our dorm building had 4 different wings, and 2 were boys and 2 were girls. Our wing was connected by another by a door down the hall, which led to a boys' wing. All floors in each wing were the same sex, and boys only had access to the girls' wings through the connecting door, which you had to have a key card for. They were locked at all times, and the key cards only worked for that dorm. I had known Michelle for a long time, and we loved the girls on our floor. We would all hang out often, and during the week and sometimes weekends, whoever would be home would leave their door open so we could stop in, hang out, and whatever. We never had a problem, and sometimes guys would take shortcuts to their wing from campus through our floor. No big deal. We got to know the guys who did this often. Most often, they all said hey if our doors were open and continued on their way. One day, our friend April got quiet when there were about 6 of us in our room, and I noticed. I asked her what was the matter, and she said, "Dude, did you not see that guy that walked by? I've seen him before. He's so fucking creepy, and he never says anything. He just stares at us." We all looked at each other and said no. She shrugged and said if he came by again, she would let us know. About an hour later, after watching some reality show, she hits Michelle in the arm. We all look up, and there is a tall guy with longer hair, wearing all black, walking slowly by. He says nothing and just stares at us, but looks away when we all look up. He leaves and we all look at each other. We chalk it up to him being lost, it's we haven't seen him before, and resume watching TV. I talked to Michelle later that night though, and we agreed to keep a lookout and let the rest of the girls know to do the same just in case. We begin to see this guy on the floor all the time. Sometimes, multiple times a day. It began to get ridiculous when we would all be changing and getting ready to go out, and he would walk by 3 to 4 times, doing nothing but staring and walking slower than necessary. Once, he walked by 6 times and we moved on to the room to shut the doors. He clearly lived in the building, because his key card worked on the locked door, and he would be there daily. We began feeling uncomfortable leaving our doors open, even when there were multiple people home, and doing so. We asked the guys we knew that across the hall on our floor if he lived there. They said no he didn't, and they actually got concerned when he told us that, because we didn't know what was going on. One of the RAs on one of the guys' floors said if it continued or got weirder, to talk to our RA. He offered to try to find out where this dude lived for us. I'd like to say it didn't get weirder, but it did. One day, I went to our dorm computer room to print off some notes for a psych class and prep the project I was going to turn in for the end of the week. Creepy bro sits next to me and starts surfing the net as I'm sitting down to do my thing on the computer. I felt ice cold. Everyone had laptops before tablets were a thing, and it felt odd he arrived almost the exact same time. I printed my shit off and left quickly. I head to my psych class, and as I get to the psych building and walk to my class, I notice he followed me. I was stressed out the entire class and left from a different exit in the lecture hall. He was still milling around as I left, and hoped to God that he didn't see me as I practically ran home. I get back, breathless, and Michelle asks what's wrong. I tell her and she looks spooked. I go, "What?" And she shows me her Facebook. Creepy guy friended her, and his name is listed as Juan, and the photo is him in his underwear. I check mine and it's same fucking thing. We knock on a few girls' doors. 6 other people also got friended. We said nope to that, practically pounded our RA's door down and said what had been going on, and I told her what had just happened to me at class. One of the other girls swore he followed her as well. She panicked and he said that she blocked him online, and she would take care of it. After that, we never saw him again, and we don't know what they did, but he was on our floor the rest of the year, and never really found out where he lived in the building. Our RA told us later that there wasn't anyone named Juan in the entire building. So Juan, let's not ever meet again. This happened back when all those clown sightings were going around. Honestly, I thought it was all just a bunch of shit until I saw one. The town I stay in is very small, so I wasn't expecting this craze to be picked up. I assumed it was going to stay in the big cities around me and eventually fizzle out. Sadly, I was mistaken. The first time I saw Bozo, that's what I'll be referring to him as, was one morning when I was walking to work. I was about halfway there when I came up to the crosswalk and waited for the light to turn so I could go. On the other side of the street, however, I could see Bozo standing behind some bushes. He was in the parking lot of an abandoned factory. I tried to brush off the creepy vibes I was getting from him and just cross the street as I normally would. Once I was close enough, I called out, "Nice costume, dumbass," and kept walking. I told a few coworkers about it, and they all agreed it was probably some dude with too much time on his hands. That night while walking home, however, I saw him again. He was in the same spot he was that morning. If I didn't know any better, I would have said he never moved all day. It was eerie as hell, the way he just stood there. He was so stoic. The only thing that moved was his head, that turned to watch me as I passed by, and the balloons he was holding that blew around in the wind. I made it home fine and went to bed soon after. That morning I woke up to get ready for work, mentally preparing myself to come in contact with Bozo again. What I didn't prepare for was the red balloon that was floating in my kitchen when I went to make coffee. I live alone, for the record, and all my doors were locked. Bozo was the immediate suspect, but why was he targeting me? All I did was call him an asshole in passing. Does that really warrant a home invasion for some stupid prank? I popped the stupid thing. I said fuck the coffee and went on about my day. Surprisingly enough, Bozo wasn't standing behind the bushes today. He was gone. I continued trying to convince myself that this was some elaborate prank brought on by one of my asshole coworkers, but we didn't know each other that well. We went out for drinks a time or two, but they'd never been to my house. A couple days passed, and stranger things started to take place. I found a clown nose on my toilet one day, a balloon tied to my bedpost, and finally, there was confetti sprinkled all throughout my house. That last one had to have happened while I was at work, because I came home to it. The other two had happened overnight. This was getting out of hand. Someone was clearly fucking with me. And even if it was a stupid prank, the guy had broken in at least 3 times at this point. I went up to the police station and convinced an officer to come back with me and check the place out. He said that from what he could tell, whoever was doing it was extremely smart. The locks had been picked instead of pried open, and he must have worn gloves, as there were no prints on the knob other than my own. I told him about Bozo, and as expected, he looked at me like I was nuts. He saw how freaked I was, and agreed that if someone had clearly broken in, he would watch my house for the night. He parked across the street in a neighboring driveway and scoped it out until about 3 a.m. I was woken up by the sirens whooping once and the lights flashing over the windows. Looking out my window, I saw the officer had someone in custody. He held him to the ground and cuffed them. I knew then that it was safe to go outside. The officer put the gun in his car and came to talk to me. He said that Bozo stood outside for about 10 minutes before finally heading up to the front door. As soon as he started to pick the lock, the officer stepped in. He said that Bozo didn't fight or protest and responded well to his orders. A question of why still lingered in my head, however. According to the officer, Bozo wouldn't talk. He refused to even utter his name. Bozo was taken in, dressed as a clown, mind you, and was fingerprinted, charged, and booked. Turns out he really was just some random guy who thought it would be funny to mess around with someone. He had a record dating back 10 years with basically nothing but robbery and breaking and entering charges. That would explain how he got into my house so easily. I've since upgraded my security and have had no more issues with clowns, or burglary for that matter. I just hope it stays that way. So my story isn't a typical story. And I'm not sure how you'd categorize it, as in folklore or maybe cryptid. So a few years ago, I and a boyfriend broke up, and he started dating a girl that in our small town was a self-proclaimed witch, or lechuza in Hispanic folklore, the shapeshifter. She would hold parties that involved certain rituals and sacrifices. She had many cats that would die mysteriously. And if you know anything about cats, it's that they die easily. She had about 5 cats die within a year, just randomly, with no real explanation. Anyway, I often had vivid dreams when I was younger. This time I fell asleep on the couch. I had a very vivid dream about the same girl. She had this evil expression on her face, and she had spoken to me. It felt like she was delivering a direct message. So when I woke up, I told my mom that I needed to talk to her, but didn't want to speak about it in front of my dad or boyfriend since they disregard the supernatural. We drove to a gas station a few miles down the road from our subdivision, and I explained the dream. We spoke about it for about 20 minutes before returning to the house. On the way back, on a street before mine, I saw a dark figure on the side of the road. I leaned in, focusing on it, since it caught my attention. Now, most times, I disregard it just as a person walking, but this was different. It was like something was forcing me to notice. It was maybe 2 feet tall, and suddenly turned to face me. When it did, I realized it was an owl. It was too large to be an owl, and the face was like a woman's. It had pale skin, its eyes were human-like, but they had no color or white to them. It had a hooked beak, like a bird. And this thing's eyes were pitch black and pierced right through me. It freaked me the fuck out. I was instantly filled with dread and overwhelming fear. I began panicking, asking if my mom had seen it too. She said no. She stopped the car and reversed. I looked back in the meantime, but I didn't see it anymore. My heart dropped in my stomach when I didn't see it. I would have felt better knowing where it had gone. It all happened in slow motion for me, but in reality, it took all of 10 seconds to pass by. We sat there for a few minutes as I explained what I saw, but my mom said she never saw it. She explained to me what it was exactly, and how her dad, my grandpa, had shown one to her and her siblings when they were kids. They fly around and whistle like a human would, and if you whistle back, you're answering it, and it'll come after you. I wish I could say that's all that happened, but it wasn't. Later that night, around 11 or so, me and my boyfriend were watching a movie when we heard a loud thud on the roof. We looked at each other like, what the fuck? He muted the TV, and we listened for a few seconds. We could hear something moving around. It sounded like scratching noises or scraping against the roof. I began crying and telling him what happened earlier. I hadn't told him because I thought he'd think I was imagining things. Him being a skeptic of the supernatural. He got up, and because our room was at the front of the house, exited our room and walked past our foyer and out the front door. He backed into the driveway and looked up at the roof. They said whatever it was gone by now. We never figured it out, but it was very strange and a creepy occurrence. It haunts me to this very day. I'm an 18-year-old female. I've been stalked quite a few times in my life, but thankfully, most of the perpetrators were annoying rather than scary. These two individuals never got to bloom into full stalkers due to the fact that I moved out of state. They were easily the creepiest individuals I'd ever met. I'd begun to attend a community college, and in an effort to make friends, joined an anime club. Once a month, we'd scrape together enough money for pizza and soda, reserve a room in the library, and spend the day watching everyone's favorites. Everything was great until the second meeting. We watched Princess Mononoke and Kiki's Delivery Service and some other similar movies. Then, Chad put in the last movie of the day. It was animated softcore porn. None of us knew what to do. We were all kind of socially awkward. He sat through our movies quietly and politely. We were supposed to do the same. We spent the hour and 20 minutes red-faced and casting at each other horrified looks, while Chad watched the porn with rapt attention. Finally, it was over, and he turned around. "What did you guys think?" he asked. He was looking directly at me. That was the first time I noticed that I was the only female in anime club. Trying to be polite, I made a huge mistake. It was, interesting? I meant it to convey his choice was interesting, considering that we'd all brought in Disney movies, but he took it to mean I was fascinated with creepy porn. From that day on, he showed up everywhere I went on campus. The second I entered any sort of common room, there he was with his laptop, trying to show me anime porn, seating himself way, way too close to me so he could lean in and try to watch it with me. Each time I would tell him, "I don't really like this show," as politely as I could, and move to another table, but he would move right back uncomfortably close to me and assure me that I would get into the story if I just watched. One day he sat down next to me with his laptop, and I heaved a sigh of relief. He pulls out a notebook and shows me a drawing. It was really creepy. It looked like a robot uterus. Hoping I'm wrong, I asked what it is. It's a creepy robot uterus. He's writing a book about an AI sex toy that invades lady parts and turns them into ravening sex fiends willing to do anything for the D. He wants my opinion on the story. I told him it wasn't really my kind of story and tried to move again. He followed and began asking me really inappropriate questions in the name of research. Thankfully, at this point, Vincent, the boy who'd brought me into anime club, noticed that Chad was following me table by table through the lunchroom as I turned even redder with embarrassment and came over. Chad fled before he could even speak. Chad was afraid of Vincent. Oh, thank God. Vincent was awesome and always in the lunchroom. I could just hang out near his anti-Chad force field. Vincent played World of Darkness with his friends in the lunchroom, and I had played all through high school. By proximity, I was eventually asked to join the game. I met with the storyteller, Paul, and gave him my character sheet. He informed me that I could keep whatever stats I had, but I was going to be taken over the role of Jenny, a long-standing NPC. I asked who Jenny was, but was only told I would get a huge kick out of it. So I attended, waiting for him to introduce me to the team. They were playing the game in a seedy strip club setting. Everyone looked bored but Paul and a player named Bill, who were wrapped up in the ordering of a pen and paper hooker. I didn't know Bill, but he was huge and creepy, with an intense, unblinking stare that was always focused either on Paul or me. I started to get a bad feeling. Then Paul announces Jenny the hooker has arrived to service Bill's character. He turns to me and grins lewdly. Bill's searing focus locks onto me. I'm not playing a hooker, I yell. Paul looks crestfallen. Bill looks enraged. Dude, just let her play the bartender. Vincent sighs when Paul begins pressuring me. Paul eventually relents, sulking. I finished that game and showed up for one more, but Paul insisted on sexualizing my character, and Bill just sat there across from me, both games breathing heavily and glaring. I quit the game. Bill started following me, and he never spoke to me, just sat across the room from me, glaring and snorting. With Chad. They were friends, of course they were. I had to abandon the cafeteria entirely, because while Chad was creepy, I was pretty sure Bill was dangerous, and he wasn't afraid of Vincent. Also, it really looked like Chad was encouraging him to do something while they stared at me whispering. I left the state at the end of the semester, but kept in touch with Vincent. About 7 years later, I married him. When I brought up all the crazy things that happened back when we met, he told me that actually everyone was afraid of Bill, particularly Paul. They tried to disband the game because all Bill wanted to do was rent fake hookers, but he'd made veiled threats that he might do something insane if they stopped playing with him. This day, I think Paul was offering me to Bill the same way you offer a crazy guy at the office a Snickers, just in the chance that if he does do something drastic, he won't do it to you.